Again. Come. All right, first and foremost, want to give all honor and glory to the Most High God, Yahweh. We do so by Hashem Yahweh Shai, that's Yahweh, who the world intimately calls God. In the name of the Son, Yahweh Shai, who the world knows is Jesus Christ. Right? It's your brother Kazak Magun coming to you from the angels of Yahweh. Right? Finna get into a lesson, man. Quick lesson. Right? Going into head coverings, right? Because I would say majority of the camps uh say that it's a sin or it's a wicked thing for you to teach, break down the Bible, read, uh, be at camp or whatever, and you got your head completely covered, like like how mine is right now, right? But we gonna get down through it. We gonna get down to it through the Spirit and see through the precepts and through some history, you know, um, what was really being talked about, when this matter was brought up, mainly when they bring this up. They speak those letters through the when he get down through that through the spirit and power of Yahweh Shem Yahweh Shah, break it down and give you the understanding, right? But let me share my screen real quick so I can start off with this quick precept, one of my favorite precepts, right? This is the book of Psalms, chapter 119 and verse 104, right? It says, "Through thy precepts I get understanding. Therefore I hate every false way." Right? So through the precepts, sometimes you gotta go through the precepts. Like it says, here a little, there a little. So like you're coming over, coming off of a cold, right? But you know how it says in the book of Isaiah, chapter 28, and verse 11, it says, here a little, there a little, right? So sometimes you got to go here a little, look at this precept, look at that precept. It's a river that runs through the Bible, right? And once you find the course of that river with whatever subject you're going over through the precepts, you're going to get the understanding, right? So yeah, let me bring this out first, man, right? Let's go to the book of Acts, chapter 17, right? Acts chapter 17, because a lot of people, I would say the main reason that this is a big thing in Israel is due to superstition, right? It's superstition, like that's all it is, right? I didn't seen camps, um, watch camp videos where brothers is getting ready to pray, and another brother he come and snatch the brother's scarf off his head, making sure that before he start praying or before he start teaching, you snatching the brother, headgear off his head because this is a superstition that we have in Israel, right? Uh, let's grab this real quick. This Acts chapter 17, I think I want verse 20, 23, 22. Acts 17 and 22. Then Salaki. Then Paul stood in the midst of Mars Hill and said, "Ye men of Athens, I perceive that in all things you are too superstitious." Right? So in all things, our people, right? And we gotta shy away from this, right? When we coming into the truth, because this is the thing that other religions they hold to, right? They're superstitious when it comes to their God, right? When the God that we serve is the true living God, right? There's no need for us to be superstitious when it comes to serving Him, right? There's like no mysticism and no all of that. Nah, you have thou shalt not. You have the stipulations that we have to live by according to serving our God, and that's all it is. That's all it is. There's no need for superstition, right? Our God is all powerful, all omnipotent, man, right? There's no need for superstition, right? So let's go to this real quick, man, because a lot of people they try to deem this Salakia, try to deem this what Paul was saying as it's law, right? But it's not law, right? This is the epistle that Paul was writing to the church of Corinth, right? This is First Corinthians 11, and I'm gonna start at 4. This is where they get it from right here. Every man praying or prophesying, having his head covered, dishonor of his head, right? So it said every man praying or prophesying, having his head covered, dishonor of his head, right? So what is what is this going into? We're gonna get what it's going into after a couple more precepts, but I'm gonna let you know that this is not a law, right? This is not a law. The law, the instruction, the Torah, the Tawarah of the Bible is the first 5 books of the Bible, right? And we are commanded, right? Deuteronomy chapter 4, right? We are commanded not to add or take away what's written in the law, right? This Deuteronomy 4 and 2, it says, "Ye shall not add unto the word which I command you, neither shall ye diminish aught from it, that ye may keep the commandments of the Lord your God, which I command you." Right? So we should not add to the word. We should not add to the law. Right? There is no law saying that a man can't have his head covered, a man can't have a scarf on his head, while he's doing while he's praying or while he's teaching or reading or whatever. There's no law that says that, right? So we can't add to it, right? Let me grab another one real quick, right? Where Paul kind of reiterated this. This is the book of Romans, chapter 4, right? Romans 4:15. It's like it. Is that what I wanted? Yeah, con. Romans 4:15. It's like it says, because the law work of wrath, for where no law is, there is no sin. Right? So where there is no law, there is no sin. You can't say that a person is in sin that when they pray and having their head covered. You can't say that. Right? That's you adding to the law. There's no law that says that, right? So what is sin? First of all, because a lot of people will say that that's sin. Right? Let's go to 1 John 3 and 4. 1 John 3 and 4. It says, "Whosoever committeth sin transgresseth also the law. For sin is the transgression of the law." So, what is sin? Sin is when you break God's laws. There is no law on a man teaching, praying, prophesying with his head covered, right? So, let's get to it, man. Right? Now that we got that out the way, saying that is not a sin, right? Let's get to it. Let's see what Paul was talking about, right? Let's go back to 1 Corinthians 11. This 1 Corinthians 11, I'm gonna start at 1, right? It says, "Be ye followers of me, even as I also am of Christ," right? Or how we would say in the Hebrew, Mashiach, right? Which is anointed in the Hebrew, right? Verse 2. "Now I praise you, brethren, that ye remember me in all things and keep the ordinances as I delivered them to you," right? So, ordinances. What are ordinances, right? Let's get this word ordinances, right? It's the Greek word G3862, paradosis, right? Paradosis. And what does that mean? Right? Giving up, giving over, the act of giving up, the surrender of cities, a giving over, which is done by the word of mouth or in writing, tradition by instruction. I believe that's what I actually want. Tradition by instruction, narrative precept, right? So tradition by instruction, right? Because us as Israelites, right, even in the ancient world, we held to a lot of traditions, right? We held to a lot of instructions and a lot of these things, right, that weren't really written in the law, right? But they were just customs or traditions for us to keep, right? Let's go back though to the scripture, right? So it says, "Now I praise you, brethren, that you remember me in all things and keep the ordinances, right, as I have delivered them to you. But I would have you know that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of the woman is the man, and the head of Christ is God," right? So that's the ladder, the tiers of how it goes, of the ranking system, right? With God and with the Israelite family, right? So it goes the Most High, it goes Christ, it goes the man, and then the woman, and then of course the children would be under her, right? That's the umbrella, right? That's the umbrella. How the umbrellas rank, from top to bottom, right? The Most High God, then Christ, then man, then woman, right? Verse 4. Every man praying or prophesying, having his head covered, dishonor of his head, right? So this verse right here, you know, is has been brought into a doctrine, right? Saying that you can't pray or prophesy. Like it been many times people from other camps or people from that learn from other congregations that comment on our videos because sometimes we'll have a hat on, whether it be a fitted cap, snapback, a scarf on our head, whatever. They would always comment and be like, "Why y'all brothers read?" It's like you. Why y'all brothers reading the Bible with y'all head covered? Why y'all doing this? Why y'all doing that? Why you got a hat on? Why you teaching? Woo, woo. First of all, where's the law? Which is what we always ask them. And second of all, you don't even know what Paul was talking about when he brought this up, right? You don't know what he was talking about, right? It was things going on in the church of Corinth, right? In this time that people were doing, they were holding to Roman customs, right? Greco-Roman customs that he didn't want our people doing. That's why he said, keep the ordinances as I delivered them to you. Right? The ordinances, meaning the ways that he told our people to worship God, is the ways that he told us to worship God. Right? Not the ways that we see the heathen and the other nations worshiping God, but keep the ordinances in which him as a leader, right, as a spiritual leader, as our elder, right, or as our rabbi or whatever, delivered them unto us. We supposed to follow those ordinances, right? So he said, every man praying or prophesying having his head covered, dishonor of his head, right? So what is he talking about? Is he talking about like a regular head covering? What does he mean? Because we see that David, for example, let's go to Second Samuel 15, right? We see David, for example, pray having his head covered, right? This Second Samuel chapter 15 and verse 30, right? Second Samuel 15 and 30, it says, and David went up by the ascent of Mount Olivet and wept as he went, and he had his head covered, right? So it said David had his head covered, right? Let's go to this word for covered, right? Had his head covered, right? The Hebrew word 26, H2645, hapa, right? Right. So let's see what this means, right? To cover, overlay, wainscoted, covered with boards or paneling to cover, to be covered, to cover, overlay, right? Like how I have this scarf overlaid, on top of my head. That's the same way, right? Let's go to Strong's definitions. A primitive rule to cover, by implication, to veil, right? To encase, protect, seal over, right? So he didn't have his face veiled, as so like as in you couldn't see his face, right? But he had his head covered, right? In the same way in which mine is right now, right? And let's see what David did while his head was covered, right? Wait, hold on for a second. I want to see some other instances in which this was used. Okay, let's just go back to the scripture, right? They mostly using it for overlay, which is like how the scarf is overlaid upon my head, right? So for 2 Samuel 15 and 30, and David went up by the ascent of Mount Olivet and wept as he went and had his head covered, and he went barefoot, and all the people that was with him covered every man his head, and they went up weeping as they went, right? So all the other people that was with him, they had their head covered too, right? It wasn't just David. And one told David, saying, Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. And David said, "Oh Lord, I pray thee, turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness." So David started praying with his head covered. David started praying with his head covered. So is this a contradiction, right, to what Paul said in 1 Corinthians 11? So like, yeah, I typed it in wrong. Right? Is this a contradiction to what Paul said in 1 Corinthians 11:4? Every man praying or prophesying, having his head covered, dishonor of his head. Because in that case, David would have dishonored his head when he did that. But we know David was a man after God's own heart, right? We know David is a man, as the scriptures say, David was a man after God's own heart. So is the scriptures contradicting, or is it something more to what Paul is talking about here? It has to be something more to what Paul is talking about, right? It says every man praying or prophesying having his head covered, dishonor of his head, right? But every woman that prayeth or prophesying with her head uncovered, dishonor of her head, for that is even all one as if she were shaven, right? So a woman that's shaven or a woman that doesn't have hair on her head, right? That would look, she was to be shamed about that, right? Like how the Lord said in the book of Isaiah, Isaiah chapter 3, right? Isaiah chapter 3 and verse, let's start at 16. Isaiah 3 and 16. It says, Moreover, the Lord saith, because the daughters of Zion are haughty and walk with stretched forth necks and wanton eyes, walking and missing as they go, and making the tickling with their feet. So he said, because our women are stuck up, Black and Hispanic and Native Indian women, because they act stuck up with how good they look, and knowing that they don't really they don't have no shamefacedness. You know, they're not discreet, they're not chaste, none of these things. What is the Lord going to do? It says, therefore the Lord will smite with the scab the crown of the head of the daughters of Zion, and the Lord will discover their secret parts. Right? So he said he's going to smite with a scab the crown of their head. He's going to take their hair away. So a woman that doesn't have no hair, she's shameful. She's ashamed of herself, because a woman, she takes pride in the beauty of her hair, right? That's why he said one of the things that he would do to them, right? Where is that at? Verse 24. It says, and it shall come to pass that instead of the sweet smell, there shall be stink. So instead of our women smelling sweet, they're gonna have them odors, man. They're gonna be musty, crusty, dusty, smell like, tilapia, right? Only getting more sloppier, right? Slovakia. It says, and instead of a girdle, a rent, and instead of well set hair, they gonna have baldness, right? Instead of the well set hair, they gonna have baldness, right? Because baldness, a woman being bald is a shameful thing, right? A woman being bald is a shameful thing, right? So that's what Paul was talking about when it came to the women having their hair covered. That goes into them being discreet, chaste, right? Them being shamefaced, right? Covering their head, right? As if they're a woman that doesn't have hair. You will want to cover your hair. You will want to be shamefaced. You will want to be discreet. What's the word that came out over the summer? Demure. You will want to be that, right? Um, Going back to 1 Corinthians. But what is he talking about when he's talking about the men, though? Right? He said the women, they should have their head covered, right? Because it was a way for our women to be shamefaced, right? But the men, He said, even every man praying and prophesying have his head covered, dishonor of his head. You're doing the same thing as the women. And that's something that they did back then in the ancient world, right? In the time of the Roman Empire, right? You had a thing called capite velato, right? Capite velato, right? Capite velato was a Roman practice in which the Romans they would go into their temples, right, to worship their gods, and the men would veil their face like a woman would. The men would veil their face with their hair covered like this, or they would have veils to where their face is completely not showing like that, right? That was a practice that the Romans had in the worship and devotion to their gods, right? And our people were doing that, though. They were bringing that into our synagogues, our Israelite synagogues, right? Trying to worship the Most High like that. And Paul is telling them, no, we don't do that here, right? We worship our God as the ordinances that I gave to you. Let's stick with those. We're not bringing something, a worship that you may have seen other people do with another God. We're not mixing that in here, right? So it says capite velato translates to with head covered and refers to a significant practice in ancient Roman religious rituals, symbolizing piety and respect for the gods, right? It says the term capite velato literally means with head covered in Latin. It is primarily associated with Roman religious practices, right, where officiants would cover their heads with the fold of their toga, right? So they'd be wearing the toga, right, the Roman style of clothing during rituals and sacrifices, right? This act was a sign of respect and reverence toward the deities being worshipped, right? Let's click this right here. Capite Velato Noma from Nova Roma. Right. Right. So it says in Latin Slovakia. This is from novaroma.org. It says in Latin there's a phrase capite velato, right? Meaning literally with head covered. The term is used in Roman religious context to refer to the act of covering the head with the veil when performing sacrifices, right? It says the practice. At the traditional public rituals of ancient Rome, officiants prayed, sacrificed, offered libations, and practiced augury capite velato with the head covered by a fold of the toga drawn up from the back. So they would veil their face, right, with the toga drawn up from the back. This covering of the head is a distinctive feature of Roman rite in contrast, right, with the Etruscan practice or ritus gracious Greek rite. In Roman art, the covered head is a symbol of pietas and individual status as a pontifex, augur, or other priest, right? So our people was doing this, right, using their togas, right, to cover their head, right, and ultimately cover their faces, right, to veil their faces, right, in religious practices, right, to give honor to the deity that they worship, right, whether it be Zeus, whether it be what is it, Kronos, or whether it be Poseidon or Hercules or whatever deity that they were serving, Jupiter, Mercurius or whatever, right? Our people they worship those gods back then, right? Because they were stuck in the Roman ways of philosophy, right? So it says right here, it says it has been argued that the Roman expression of piety capite velato, right, influenced Paul's prohibition against Christians praying with covered heads. Any man who prays or prophesies with his head, and it quotes the verse right there what Paul was talking about, right? So like this is what Paul was saying, right? He was talking about our people performing religious rites that had association with other gods, right? And not the ordinances that we held as Israelites, in which we would use to worship our God, right? You had, because our women, right, and this was right, with the way that our men was doing these things, right? Paul was telling our men not to do as the women would be doing, right? Because the men, they would be veiling over, putting veils over their faces, right? They'd be putting veils over their faces, right? Doing the capite velato, right? With the head completely covered, just like that, right? And basically, that was what our women did in the ancient world of Israel, right? Let me go to this real quick. Well, matter of fact, let me read it in First Corinthians, and then I'm gonna give an example of our women doing it, right? It says, "For if the verse 6, it says, for if the woman be not covered, let her also be shorn. But if it be a shame for a woman to be shorn or shaven, let her be covered." Right? For a man indeed ought not to cover his head, for as much as he is the image and glory of God, but the woman is the glory of the man. Right? So it says the women, they ought to have their head covered, right? Because this was an act of them being shamefaced, right? Let's go to Genesis, right? Genesis 24. This is the book of Genesis, chapter 24, and verse 65, I believe is what I want. Right, speaking about Rebecca, right? This is Genesis 24 and 65. It says, "For she has said unto the servant," right? I'm gonna start at 64. "And Rebecca lifted up her eyes." This is when she was coming up upon Isaac, coming from her homeland, right? From her I believe from her brother Laban, from her brother Laban's house and her father's house, right? When Abraham sent his servant to go get her for Isaac to be a wife. Said Rebecca lifted up her eyes, and when she saw Isaac, she lighted off the camel. It says, "For she had said unto the servant, what man is this that walketh in the field to meet us?" And the servant had said, "It is my master." Therefore she took a veil and covered herself, right? This is her being shamefaced right here. Right? It says she took a veil and covered herself. Salakia. She didn't want to walk up on them being proud, right? Strong's H 6809, right? Right. It says rapper, shawal, right? A veil, right? So she wrapped a veil or a scarf around her head and her face, man, covered her face, right? To be shamefaced. So Paul was admonishing our men in the book of First Corinthians not to do that, because one is the worship of another God, right? And when you veil in your face, it's kind of something that our women would be doing back in the ancient world, right? Um, Another thing that brothers told me that they encountered, right? Now that we didn't dealt with that, right? Showing you that that's actually capite velato, right? Which was a Roman practice, using your toga to veil your face, right? We're gonna go into the book of Maccabees, right? Because another thing that brothers told me that they encountered in the comment section was saying that people was telling them that them wearing hats during camp was the same thing that the Greeks made us do. You know, was the same hats was a Greek that hats are a Greek custom or whatever. And we gonna get down to the bottom of that. Because that's just utterly false, right? We're gonna get down to the bottom of that, right? It's the book of Second Maccabees, chapter 6 and verse. I'm gonna start at 1 and I'm gonna jump down, right? It says this Second Maccabees 6 and 1. It says, "Not long after this, the king sent that old man of Athens to compel the Jews to depart from the laws of their fathers and not to live after the laws of God," right? So the king, which was I believe it was Antiochus, right? He wanted our people. He wrote a letter when you read it in First Maccabees, right? 1 and 40 on down. He wrote a letter to all the provinces that he ruled over and said that everybody should be one people and everybody should take after the Greek way of fashion, the Greek philosophies, and the service of the Greek gods, right? It says, and this is further admonishing that it says, and to pollute also the temple of Jerusalem and to call it the temple of Jupiter Olympius, right? Olympius, right? Olympius is, where we get the modern day Olympics from. All of that is the worship of Greek gods. All of that is Greco-Roman culture, right? That's why they have those Olympic rings, right? That's why you see something called the laurel wreath, which is what we gonna go into, right? Because all of that goes into the worship of Greek gods, right? It says, and that Angarism of Jupiter, the defender of strangers, as they did desire that dwelt in that place, right? I'm going down to verse 6. It says, neither was it lawful for a man to keep Sabbath days or ancient feasts or to profess himself at all to be a Jew. So they took away our rights to keep the ways of our fathers. We couldn't keep the Sabbath, our feast days, right? We had to sneak and keep the Passover, right? We couldn't go to our synagogues or to the temple, right, to give our sacrifices. We couldn't do these things, right, or else we'd be killed by the Greeks, right? And we couldn't then profess ourselves to be a Jew. We couldn't call ourselves, our tribal name, right? We had to call ourselves Greeks. That's why in the New Testament you see that you see like in that verse, I talk about the uh the actual ethnic Greek. It's talking about the Jews or the Israelites that were forced to call themselves Greek because they took on the Greek ways of culture, right? But you got to know the history to be able to understand these things, right? This verse 7. And in the day of the king's birth, every month they were brought by bitter constraint to eat of the sacrifices. And when the feast of Bacchus was kept, the Jews were compelled to go in procession to Bacchus, carrying what is that? What is this word? I don't know what that word is, right? But the old English kind of throw me off a little bit, right? But that feast of Bacchus, that's where you get Carnival from, right? That Carnival, that's where you get the Mardi Gras, right? Freaknik, right? All of these feast festivals that we keep today, tie back to that feast of Bacchus, man. When you so like when you look into it, verse 8, it says, moreover, there went out a decree to the neighbor of the cities of the heathen by suggestion of Ptolemy against the Jews that they should observe the same fashions, right? And be partakers of their sacrifices, right? So we had to observe, we was being forced to observe the same fashions as the Greeks. This is why we started wearing togas and all those things, right? This is why we started practicing the capite balato, right? Because of that Greco-Roman fashion and influence that we was forced to endure, right? And whoso would not conform themselves to the manners of the Gentiles should be put to death. So if you wasn't trying to take on their culture and their fashion, you was gonna get put to death. It says, then might a man have seen the present misery, right? Verse 10. It's like, I'm gonna jump down to mm, we're gonna say built a place of exercise, like yeah. Bear with me. Let me find this quick precept. Uh, Fourth chapter, right? So we get into the history of why our people begin to do some of these things, and this is one of the things that they were forced to do, right? This is First Maccabees 4, and I'm gonna start at 11. Right? It says, and the royal privileges granted of special favor to the Jews by the means of John, the father of Eupolemus, right? Who went ambassador to Rome for amity and aid, he took away and putting down the governments which were according to the law, he brought up new customs against the law, right? So the customs that they was bringing from Rome and from Greece were against our laws. What is this custom? Because putting something regularly on your head be against the law. But what could make it against the law if it falls in the lines of idolatry, right? And we're gonna show that. It says, "For he built gladly a place of exercise under the tower itself, and brought the chief young men under his subjection, and made them wear a hat." Right. So he brought the chief young men. Right. The main part that you want to look at, right, is he built a place of exercise, right, a gymnasium, right. And when you go to gymnasium, when you look into the word gymnasium, right, it means to wrestle naked, right. So back then the Greeks, they was known for wrestling. That's why you got certain branches of wrestling called called Greco wrestling, right? Greco wrestling, which is Greco style wrestling, where it's a style where you kicks that, right? You just got to wrestle from the upper body, right? And that was a Greek style of wrestling. That's something that they did back then. That's something that they took our young men and brought them into and put them into their Greek games, right? The Olympics, right? They brought us into those things, and they said what? And made them wear a hat, right? What is a hat? What hat will go with exercise? What hat will go with being into games and things like that? I'm gonna show you what hat. That hat is called the laurel wreath, right? This is the laurel wreath right here, right? They will put this on their head. It was supposed to be a sign, right, of the god Apollo, the Greek god Apollo, right? Who I believe was like a god of good fortune and a god of like let's just look it up. Let's look up what Apollo was the god of, right? Right. So Apollo, one of the 12 Olympian gods, is a multi-faced deity associated with various domains, including music, poetry, prophecy, healing, archery, and the sun. He is depicted as okay. All right, right, right. Let's click on this right here. Right, right. It says Apollo has been recognized as the god of archery, music, dance, truth, and prophecy, healing of diseases, the sunlight, poetry, and more. Right. Slide, bear with me. I want to see if they get into the Olympics down here. See if I can get into the Olympics on there. Right, here you go. Apollo's influence on Olympic Games, a celebration of athleticism. So one of the main things that he would represent would be athleticism, right? Apollo's influence on the Olympic Games is significant as he embodies the ideas of athleticism, competition, and honor, right? That's what I was looking for, right? So he was one of the main gods of the Olympics, right? And what did it say in Second Maccabees? It said, verse 12, for he built gladly a place of exercise. What is exercise? Athleticism, right? Under the tower itself, and brought the chief young men under his subjection and made them wear a hat. That hat, as I was going into, is called the laurel wreath, right? Now let's get back into this laurel wreath. Right, so the laurel wreath is this okay? I had an article pulled up on it, right? This is from Greek.mythologyworldwide.com, right? So going into Greek mythology, right, which is idolatry for us. So this is the laurel wreath. This is the hat that they will have our young men wear, right? This is the hat that it's talking about in Maccabees, right? It's not talking about a fitted cap, not talking about a baseball hat. It's not talking about that, right? It's like it says the Pythian Games held in. Oh, I'm gonna jump up. I'm gonna jump up a little bit more. The laurel wreath is an iconic symbol deeply rooted in ancient history, represents victory, honor, and achievement. Traditionally made from the leaves of the laurel tree, this emblem has transcended time and culture, becoming synonymous with accomplishment and success, right? Ancient Greek traditions. The laurel wreath has its origins in ancient Greek culture, where it is closely associated with the god Apollo. According to mythology, Apollo pursued the nymph Daphne, who in an attempt to escape his advances, transformed into a laurel tree. Salakia. In honor of her, Apollo fashioned a crown from his leaves, making the laurel as a sacred symbol, right? So he fashioned the crown, which is all madness, man. Greek mythology. All this has to do with the worship of another god. And what did the Most High say? Right? Let's go to Exodus. Exodus 20. Exodus 20 and 2. I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the house of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Right? Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Right? So we can't worship any other gods besides the Most High. When you're doing these things, right? When you put on this laurel wreath, you're worshiping the Greek god Apollo, right? Right? When you celebrate and when you take part in the Olympics, you're worshiping the Greek gods. You're paying homage to them, giving honor to them, because that's what the games were for. When you're doing Capite Bellotto, you're paying homage to the Roman gods, right? That's what our people were doing back then. It's not talking about modern day hats, right? The Pythian Games, right? Held in Delphi in honor of Apollo, featured athletic and artistic competitions where victors were awarded laurel wreaths. They was awarded laurel wreaths. This practice established the wreath as a prize for excellence, linking it firmly to the ideals of victory and glory. So our men, when they did the places of exercise, when they did the wrestling, when they did the archery, when they did the pole vault, when they did the shot put, when they ran the 50-yard dash, the 100-meter dash or whatever, when they did all these things and they did good, they were given laurel wreaths, right? They were given laurel wreaths. Nowadays they give you medals, and I believe that medal has the wreath on it. If I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong though. Let me see. See that? See that? The metal got the reef on it. So that nowadays they took the regular reef and replaced it with the metal. But the metal got the damn reef on it. You can't make this up, man. You can't make this up. This is what our people are doing. So if you're doing these things, you're still rooted. You're still doing things that are rooted in idolatry, right? Let's go back to this though. See, you can't make these things up. It says role in ancient athletic competitions. In addition to Pythian games, laurel wreaths were awarded in other athletic contests such as the Olympic Games. Can't make this up. This is what this is talking about, man. Athletes who excelled were crowned with the wreaths. Athletes who excelled were crowned with the wreaths. What does it say in Second Maccabees? For he gladly built a place of exercise under the tower itself and brought the chief young men under his subjection and made them wear a hat. You can't make this up, man. Let's keep going, though. I'm cooking right now. Let's keep going. Right? It was crowned with wreaths symbolizing their hard work, dedication, and triumph. Roman adoption and evolution. The Romans adopted the laurel wreath from the Greeks, expanding its significance beyond athletic victories to military and political triumphs, man. You can't make this up, man. You can't, and our people are still doing these things today. Right? I just showed you that the metal, the damn Olympic medals, got the wreath on it around the damn trophy. Whether you get gold, bronze, silver, it got the wreath on it. Man, I think the Most High Yahweh Shem Yahushua, right? I'm gonna grab a closing precept, man. All right, I'm gonna grab a closing precept. I didn't want this to be too long. Where I'm at 45 minutes, 47. Grab a closing precept through the spirit and power Yahweh Shem Yahushua. What the crap? Let's go to First Thessalonians. I think I'm on the 5th chapter. Right, this First Thessalonians 5 and 22. Right, it says abstain from all appearance of evil, man. Right, abstain from all appearance of evil. Right, so that's what we ought to do. Right, and what I just broke down, the things that we brought over from the Greco-Roman lifestyles and philosophies that our people were trying to hold on to back then, we have to abstain from those things, man. Right? It's not talking about a hat. It's not talking about this scarf that I got on, right? Capa de Velato, what Paul was talking about in Romans 11, is talking about you using your toga to veil your head and paying homage to another god. Abstain from that, right? The hat that our people had to wear in Maccabees is not talk about my damn Cubs hat. And I ain't talking about my Bulls hat. It's talking about the laurel wreath, man. The laurel wreath in which the Greeks made our people wear in honor of their Olympic Games, man. That's what that's going into, right? And I thank the Most High Yahweh Bashim Yahushua for the understanding. Lord willing, you're gonna be edified, man. Lord willing. If not, I understand this lesson may ruffle some feathers. I understand that this lesson may edify some people, Lord willing. But I just pray that you take heed to what I'm saying, and if you disagree, go ahead and scrutinize it. But through the research, This through the research is there, man. It's plain upon tables, right? It's plain upon tables. I understand that the way brothers been teaching, they got the little they put the scarf on their head with the hole at the top. That's not what that's talking about. That's superstition. We gotta abstain from superstition. We gotta refrain from that, man. It's time to come out of that. Knowledge shall be increased, right? This is what these things is going into. The Lord is not on your ass if you're wearing a hat while you at camp. That's not what that's talking about, right? So once again, I want to give all honor and glory to the Most High God, Yahweh Bashim Yahushua. Uh, keep the commandments, keep the faith in Yahweh Bashim Yahushua, keep the faith in Yahweh Shah, the Son, right? It's your brother Kazak Magun. Shalom.